Before getting into visual effects, runtimes, post-production, legalities and all that, we need to go back and understand first of all what caused the situation where there is a demand to release the Snyder Cut. On March 25th of 2016, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice opened worldwide to a flood of negative reviews and backlash from the fans. With a 28% score on Rotten Tomatoes and a 63% audience score, things were starting not to look good. Even some journalists were calling it possibly the worst comic book movie ever made or an insult to the fans, so it was clear that Warner Bros. Wasn't exactly happy with these negative reviews, but what they cared about the most, as in a studio, was money. BVS opened worldwide with around $330 million at the box office and finished its theatrical run accumulating around $875 million worldwide. Considering that the studio was expecting $1 billion at least because the movie had the two biggest superheroes ever in it, they started to do what you're never supposed to do when you are making wise business decisions. They started to panic. Now, we can partially understand where this panic comes from. Bad reviews, bad public reception, a disappointing box office. So, who did they choose to blame? Themselves for cutting down the movie from the original director's cut of 3 hours to the theatrical cut of 2 hours and 32 minutes, and by doing so removing the most important scenes story-wise where we saw why characters had certain motivations in the film? No, they chose to blame Zack Snyder and his vision for the DCEU. And it wasn't like it was the third time his original cut was much better than what the studio decided to release in theaters, right? So how exactly did WB panic, you might ask? Well, first of all, it was confirmed by Zack Snyder that he and Chris Terrio had already written the script for Justice League before BVS came out. And after the reception of the movie, they were asked by the studio to rewrite it so it wasn't as dark and scary as it was supposed to be. I would like to make a note here. It happens all the time in big Hollywood movies where the director is asked to change things, to compromise in certain aspects of his vision in favor of the vision the studio has of the film. But in this case, as you will see, the amount of changes the studio wanted to make were a lot. After the rewrites that I just mentioned, we have to add that the studio wanted to accelerate the hope and optimism, and by doing that they were starting to shift from the original vision Zack Snyder had of this universe to one that would please critics and fans alike. It's also worth mentioning that Justice League started filming just 2 months after the release of BVS, so they were well into pre-production when they had to make all these changes that the studio wanted them to make. So Zack started filming his compromised Justice League movie. He shot around 7 months from April to October. Geoff Johns was brought in set to help accelerate the hope and optimism the studio wanted, as he is a well-known incredible comic book creator. This caused tensions on set, as this quote from Chris Terrio shows, where he told Geoff to maybe use some of my pages. During this time, there were countless debates about what the future of DC films should be or feel like. Most people wanted future movies to be more optimistic and more colorful, and because of that, they wanted Zack Snyder out of the DCEU. There was even an online petition to have him fired and removed from Justice League. All this fan outrage caused the studio to panic even more, as executives were starting to think if Zack was indeed the right person to overhead this whole universe. But he finished shooting his movie, as they hadn't decided to make a radical decision yet. Yes, they had asked Zack to make some changes to the movie, but he was still attached to it. Some of those changes he compromised to were things like changing Steppenwolf's design from the one we see in BVS to the one we see in the theatrical cut. Also, another notable change was that Zack wanted Superman to have the black suit, but he was asked to change that. As you may feel by now, Warner Bros. Wanted to accelerate the hope and optimism. Zack wanted to keep his vision going, but he had to compromise on aspects of it. And Geoff Johns, by order of the studio, was continuously rewriting scenes, which caused the writer Chris Terrio to start to get frustrated. And all of this was creating a climate that clearly wasn't going to end well. At that time, all we knew was that Zack entered post-production on October as he finished filming, and he started to work on the film. He screened a rough cut of the film to Warner Bros. Executives on January 2017, which will be important later. On March 25th, the first Justice League trailer came out, which showed some amazing action pieces as well as some incredible cinematography and shots. But on March 2017, tragedy hit Snyder's family. His daughter Autumn committed suicide, and after trying to keep working on the film, Zack knew he needed to take a break to be with his family. I won't go further into this for respect to both Autumn and Zack's family. And a side note here, please, if you have any suicidal thoughts, reach out to anyone, family, friends, anyone. You can also call these numbers depending on your country if you ever need to talk to someone. And always remember, You are loved, and the world is a better place with you in it, and if you ever need help, ask for it. Zack stepped down from Justice League and Joss Whedon was brought in to finish what Snyder had already shot and add some scenes that supposedly Zack already wanted to shoot. Joss Whedon then decided to fire Yankee XL and bring in Danny Elfman to compose the score for the film. These reshoots began filming on May 2017 and lasted for 55 days, and they added as much as 80 new pages worth of script. All the actors were asked to come back for the reshoots, but there was a problem. Henry Cavill was filming Mission Impossible and he couldn't save his mustache for the reshoots, so it was going to be removed digitally. Joss Whedon worked on the reshoots he had done from June to November 2017. Supposedly, as the studio had said, minor scenes were going to be filmed, but Zack's vision was still going to be there. During this time, articles where Geoff Johns and Jon Berg talked about how the hope and optimism had been accelerated started to appear, which was strange considering that Snyder had already shot his movie which had his vision on it, and Joss Whedon was going to make just some minor changes to it. November 17 came and oh boy was it a bad day. Justice League opened with a disappointing box office of around $280 million worldwide, for a movie that was supposed to be the Avengers of the DCEU. And that wasn't the only way in which it disappointed, it was a failure among critics and fans, who in the first couple of days said the movie was fine, but the more they saw it, the more they started to realize the Frankenstein monster it was. The reshoots were very clearly noticeable, Henry Cavill's CGI mouth was nightmare fuel, the color grading was awful, Ben Affleck was clearly out of shape in some scenes, the hair of some characters changed from frame to frame, the CGI wasn't finished, etc, etc, etc. And all this with Zack Snyder's name as the director of the film. But there was an important thing. Where were all those amazing scenes from the trailers? Almost nothing that was on trailer 1 was on the theatrical cut. Some of the scenes of the next 2 trailers were, but there were lots that were clearly missing. And the ones that were completely changed. The cutting of these scenes also led to the question of why was the movie just 2 hours long? Snyder is known for making really long movies. That wasn't typical in a filmmaker like him. While people were starting to ask themselves all these questions, Justice League ended its theatrical run with an extremely disappointing $690 million worldwide. For a movie that had cost around $300 million to make, that wasn't a good thing. After some days of people trying to understand what just had happened, a petition was started online to have Zack Snyder's original Justice League cut released. This petition got up to 180k signatures as it gained traction on its first few days. But the question was, is there a Snyder Cut or is it even finished? With all this talk going around, some people were expecting a Snyder Cut release for home media, but the Blu-ray only had 2 deleted Superman scenes, which were clearly Snyder's. That had an incredible looking Superman with no digitally removed mustache, showing us the black suit with the original score from Man of Steel. Now Zack Snyder had started posting deleted Justice League scenes in pictures a little before the release, with some of them being a Batman shot, Iris West who was completely cut out of the movie, and a Victor Stone deleted scene. This trend of posting deleted scenes pictures continued and people started to get hyped about an announcement on San Diego Comic-Con 2018, which never came, but what came was a hit piece by journalist Ben Fritz, a clearly studio-biased article that had the aim of killing the movement, with quotes from unnamed Warner Bros. Executives that said things like, we don't know of what cut these people are talking about, we don't know anything about a magical Snyder Cut. This article did nothing but infuriate the fans. Now that a big journalist had made an article stating that it didn't exist, with quotes from the studio, the general public were starting to doubt if it did indeed exist, although that doubt was always there. Coordinated campaigns with the hashtag Release the Snyder Cut on Twitter were beginning to get some traction. That, combined with statements from actors that worked on the movie, like Jason Momoa saying 2 times in interviews in the press junket for Aquaman that he was obsessed with the Snyder Cut too.
I'm obsessed with it too. Are you? Yeah.
Made the buzz grow even bigger and bigger. It's also worth mentioning that Jay Oliva, a storyboard artist and director, stated multiple times on Twitter that a Snyder Cut didn't exist, as he had worked on the film himself. Something remarkable was that Snyder fans raised sometimes by their own initiative, and some other times with help from Zack Snyder, thousands and thousands of dollars to donate to the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. which is something incredible. These campaigns include a Snyder-designed t-shirt that got up to $80,000 donated, flying banners over Warner Bros. With the hashtag Release the Snyder Cut, bus stops, etc. In all of the campaigns designed by the fans, half of it was being donated to the AFSP. Then, on November 2019, after some comments on an interview where Jason Momoa said that the Snyder Cut was a completely different film from the one we got on theaters, and implying that Snyder had finished the VFX for his cut, combined with a post from Jason Momoa of a deleted Justice League scene the day after of the interview, and the confirmation that Yankee XL had the score finished for the Snyder Cut, which was a topic that had been discussed for a long time, the Snyder Cut fire was starting to rise.
Have we started the fire?
Yes. The fire rises.
Then, on November 17th, something happened, one of the biggest flexes on cinema history. The Snyder Cut fandom, after a couple of days of making the hashtag trend with the help of daily posts from Snyder, set a goal of 214k tweets on Sunday in order to commemorate the 2-year anniversary of Justice League. The fandom pushed together as one and got to the mark of 214k tweets, and some minutes later, Gal Gadot posted a deleted scene picture of Justice League with the caption, "Release the Snyder Cut." Then Ray Fisher did the same thing. Then Ben Affleck did it too. Snyder retweeted these posts with these captions. Then everyone started joining the hashtag. Actors like Dave Bautista, directors like Josh Trank, journalists, or even more Justice League actors like Joe Manganiello or Jeremy Irons. With this support, the fandom got up to almost 800,000 tweets on a single day, making it trend bigger than some of the biggest DC releases ever. Now imagine, you have been publicly and internally criticized for months. You film a movie making all the compromises that you can accept. You start working on post-production. You have to leave. Some reports say that he was fired, but that was never confirmed. Then they destroy your movie and you have your name on it. And 2 years later, after people constantly trying to say that your cut of the movie didn't exist, that it wasn't anything more than an assembly cut, you have 800,000 people behind you, which includes some of the biggest faces on Warner Bros. Asking for your cut of the movie. Like I said before, if that is not the biggest flex on a studio ever, I don't really know what is. The question of whether a Snyder Cut even existed was a constant discussion from the very moment Justice League was released. Over time, some journalists said that the movie was far from complete, that it didn't even exist, but the more Snyder posted photos on Vero and the more some other journalists started to investigate further, news started to come out, with one of them being the Snyder Cut of Justice League is more complete than you think. Or even after November 17th, after 2 years of speculation, Snyder closed the debate posting this picture. The discussion then focused on the level of completion of the film. We know that the ADR is done, like these pictures show. We know that the score is finished, like Yankee XL confirmed. We know that the runtime of the film is 214 minutes. The only uncertainty is the level of completion of the VFX, that by judging from some Snyder photos varies from scene to scene, but the latest reports indicate that the film is 90 to 95% finished, so the money needed to complete those VFX shots will be in the millions, but something around $25 to $30 million, not the initial numbers that were being thrown around of $70 or $80 million. So yes, like Zach said, of course it exists. The fact that the VFX aren't 100% finished doesn't mean that a cut of a movie doesn't exist. With a closed runtime, done color grading and score, it just simply exists. The release of this movie matters for a lot of reasons, with artistic integrity being one of them. No artist should have his work destroyed in such a way after years of work put into it. Just imagine working on a project for years and being extremely passionate about it, only to get it ripped away from you to make it a Frankenstein-esque movie. And not only the director, but actors' works were also ripped apart, like Ray Fisher's Cyborg story arc that was completely changed, and also completely cut out characters like Darkseid, who was portrayed by Ray Porter, and many, many more. But the one that is most important, above anything else, is for Zack Snyder. Zack suffered continuous pressure from both the studio and the fans, which led him to change things from his movie before even leaving it. The studio took a big part on this pressure, but the fans were not short on it either, having lots of people insulting him via Twitter, which was what led him to move to Vero to use social media. And yeah, sure, directors and actors get shit all the time on Twitter, but the amount of unnecessary hate this man was receiving was simply unjust. Just look at these tweets respected journalists and bloggers were putting out. And if you are able to see interviews he does, the amount of things he does for his fans, like contests where he gives the winner set props and a collection of all his films, conventions to meet fans and watch his movies together, like in March 2019 in the so-called Snyder Cut. You can clearly see that Zack is just a cool guy making films, which is what he loves to do. He had to leave the film because of the most horrible thing that can happen to a parent. And while he was taking time grieving the loss of his daughter, the studio decided to take his film, rip it apart, and change it completely. Yes, the primary goal of the Release the Snyder Cut movement is to see Zack Snyder's original vision for Justice League, but not only that, but to fight for other filmmakers' visions as well, like David Ayer and his cut of Suicide Squad. The Release the Snyder Cut hashtag has become something more. It has become a symbol of unconformity on studios butchering directors' visions. It has become a symbol of saying that's enough. We will not look the other way when artists who work their asses off in a project get replaced as if it was nothing. It has also become a movement of people who have been able to achieve extraordinary things, like the mentioned money donated to the AFSP. So in the end, the Snyder Cut matters, for the fans, for the cast and crew who worked on it, for the art of filmmaking and for artistic integrity. But deep down, it matters because of him. He's the one who deserves it the most. I really hope this video has helped you look at the Release the Snyder Cut movement in a different way, or at least understand why we are so passionate about it. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!